Hi guys, this is Justin Lake giving my presentation on Tort Liability, Module 13 for Ed Law. I apologize for the lighting. My family's asleep. This is the only room I can do this presentation. It's always dark. Tort liability, the obligation legally of one party to the victim resulting from a civil wrong or injury. There's a couple different types. The intentional tort is an offense committed by an individual who intends to do harm to another person or understands that his or her actions may cause harm. Then there's negligence, which is often characterized as the failure to exercise the standard of care that a reasonably prudent person would have exercised in a similar situation. The first case I decided to talk about was Frame versus Como. Basically, there was a test going on, and a student was speaking aloud and being disruptive. He was doing this after some other students had already been asked to leave the room for misbehaving during the test. The student was asked twice to leave after he was speaking out loud. He ignored the request from the teacher, and the teacher began to move over towards him, and as he got closer, the student stood up as if he were to confront the teacher. When the teacher went to grab the student by the arm to escort him out of the room, it kind of simultaneously happened as the student stood up, kind of shook him a little bit. He stumbled backwards and ended up falling down and didn't have really any injuries, at least from what I saw. The student, Frame, filed a suit claiming that Como's actions constituted an assault and battery on him. The court found that Como did a battery, but it was justified by Frame's actions. I think the moral of that story is, even though Como got lucky and there were no charges pressed against him and he wasn't held liable, don't touch a student unless you must. If that was me in that situation, I would have just called the office, have administration come down, maybe the SRO officer, to escort the student so my hands didn't have to be placed on them in any way, shape, or form. The next case I did was Flanagan versus Canton. The background of this story is that Flanagan was in a PE class that was getting kind of rowdy one day. Canton, he was the teacher. He stopped class early to lecture the class about following rules and procedures and following the instructions of the class and what the expectations are. The class was dismissed to go back to the locker room and change, while Canton stayed to address a matter with another student in the gym for a matter of 2 to 3 minutes. While in the locker room, Flanagan got pushed into a locker, hit a bench, and suffered seriously bodily injury that required surgery. Flanagan's mother sued the district, alleging her son's injuries were the result of negligent supervision by the teacher. The court ultimately sided with Flanagan and reasoned that because students were misbehaving that day, the teacher owed a greater duty to supervise, especially because their conduct was foreseeable. I teach 2 high school weights classes. I don't like to be in the locker room staring at kids while they change. I think that's creepy, but you got to be close enough to be able to hear everything that's going on. So when there is some type of disruption or altercation, you can run in there and stop it immediately. Just be aware of the pulse of your class. Some days everything's gravy and everybody's getting along. Other days there's altercations. People are getting chippy during the games in PE. And you might need to keep a closer eye. The third case that I decided to talk about was Johnson versus School District of Millard. The background of this one is Johnson was a first grader, and he was in his music class. They were learning how to sing and play the game London Bridge is Falling Down. The teacher gave instructions on how to be safe while playing the game, but she immediately turned her back to write something on the board when the kids started to play the game. Johnson was in the arms of another student while he was swinging back and forth. They accidentally released him, and he fell into a bookcase. He received 50 stitches in his head, had blurred vision temporarily, and continues to have headaches. The court found the teacher guilty of negligent supervision. The court also rewarded the Johnsons with money for medical bills, permanent disfigurement due to the 50 stitches, and pain and suffering. I think anytime you're teaching a lesson in a regular classroom or a music classroom, or definitely in a PE classroom, that involves any type of risk of injury, you got to stay awake. You got to keep your eyes open. If my kids are playing any type of game in PE class, I'm not checking my email. I'm not responding to email. I'm not, writing down scripts for practice or anything like that. When they're playing the game, you got to keep an eye out and make sure everybody's being safe. Maybe when they're doing their stretch, you can respond to an email, but not when kids are being physically active, especially not first graders. The next one I did was Rollins versus Concordia Parish School Board. The background is there was a substitute teacher watching 40 kids on the playground. As it turns out, there actually was supposed to be another teacher out there as well, but they decided that one of the teachers could just watch all 40 kids while the other one got a little bit of extra playing time. The girls were playing on all the equipment while the boys were playing basketball on the court. The teacher noticed that the girls were going too fast on the merry-go-round and told them to slow down and get off. Almost as soon as she got done saying that, she heard two boys arguing over the basketball and went over to address that before watching the girls stop on the merry-go-round and get off. As soon as she got to the boys, she heard a girl yelling that someone had fallen off the merry-go-round and had been injured. The school district was sued for failure of supervision on the playground. Initially, they were awarded $10,000 to Rollins, but eventually the case went to trial court and it was reduced to $5,000 because they found that Rollins was 50% guilty for trying to get off of the merry-go-round while it was still moving. I think what it comes down to me, I wouldn't want a merry-go-round at my school. Yes, they're fun. They're a great time. But sometimes fun things aren't worth the potential liability and risks that are involved with them. And merry-go-rounds are definitely one of those things that, yeah, they bring fun, but they bring trouble with them. And the last one that I decided to do was Golden versus Milford Exempted Village School District. There was a basketball player that was sexually attacked by another member of the team while others held him down. They were waiting for the bus to pick them up to go to practice or an away game. At the time that the attack happened, there was no adult supervision. The parents' victims filed suit against the student aggressor, so the attacker, not the one holding them down. That the basketball coach, school district, they filed a suit against the aggressor, the basketball coach, and the school district, suing the coach and district for civil hazing and negligent supervision. Civil hazing was ruled to be more like bullying, and although it was the coach's duty to supervise, he didn't act in a manner that made him liable. The fact of the matter here is always monitor the locker room. Like I stated before, you don't have to sit in there and watch every kid change, but be close enough to hear what's going on in there. Be able to run in at a moment's notice and stop any type of violence or wrongdoings that are going on in the locker room. This concludes my assignment and my presentation over tort liability.